There are children who learn very early that harmony is not something that happens naturally. It must be earned. They discover, quietly, that love feels safest when everyone else is calm, when voices stay soft, when disappointment never enters the room. And so they begin to adjust themselves, almost instinctively, shaping their words, their reactions, even their emotions, around what others might need. These children are often described as easy, polite, mature beyond their years. They do not demand much. They rarely cause trouble. They sense tension before it is spoken and move quickly to smooth it over. A smile arrives before tears have time to form. Apologies come even when no harm was done. They learn how to disappear without leaving, how to stay present without taking up space. From the outside, it looks like kindness, cooperation, emotional intelligence. But inside, something quieter is forming. A belief that safety lives in approval. That connection depends on being agreeable. That love, once withdrawn, might never return. This pattern rarely begins with intention. No child wakes up and decides to become pleasing. It begins in moments too small to notice. A raised eyebrow when emotions are expressed too loudly. A sigh when needs interrupt. An adult's exhaustion. Praise given only when behavior is convenient. Affection that feels warmer when expectations are met. Slowly, the child starts to connect emotional survival with emotional suppression. They learn which parts of themselves are welcomed and which ones create distance. Curiosity becomes caution. Anger becomes shame. Sadness becomes something to manage alone. Over time, the child begins to scan every room, every face, searching for cues. Who needs comfort? Who needs space? Who must not be upset? The self becomes flexible, adaptable, endlessly considerate. Often these children grow up in environments where emotional unpredictability exists. Not always abuse, not always neglect, sometimes just inconsistency. Love that fluctuates, care that depends on mood, stress, or circumstance. In these spaces, children become interpreters. They learn to read between tones, to anticipate reactions before they happen. Pleasing becomes a form of protection. In other cases, the environment rewards performance. Achievement brings attention. Good behavior brings praise. Being helpful brings affection. The child internalizes the idea that worth is something proven, not inherent. They feel most visible when they are useful, most lovable when they are needed. Their inner world slowly organizes itself around one central question: how can I be enough for everyone else? What is rarely acknowledged is how exhausting this becomes. Even in childhood, the nervous system stays alert, always listening, always adjusting. The body learns tension as normal. Relaxation feels unfamiliar. Rest feels earned only after everything is done and everyone else is satisfied. The child may not know how to ask for help, because asking feels like a burden. Emotionally, these children often struggle to identify their own needs. Not because they do not have them, but because those needs were never prioritized. Desire feels selfish. Boundaries feel dangerous. Saying no feels like rejection waiting to happen. So they say yes, again and again, even when it hurts. Psychologically, this creates a fragile sense of self. Identity becomes relational, shaped by feedback rather than inner truth. The child becomes who others need them to be. Their inner voice grows quiet, replaced by constant monitoring of external reactions. Approval becomes a compass. Disapproval feels like a threat. There is often a deep confusion here, because pleasing others does bring connection, at least temporarily. It keeps conflict away, it creates smiles, it earns praise, but it also erodes authenticity. The child feels loved for their compliance, not their existence. Over time, this creates a subtle grief, a sense of being unseen, even while being appreciated. As these children grow older, the pattern deepens. Teachers commend their responsibility. Friends rely on their emotional availability. Family members expect their understanding. The role solidifies: the good one, the easy one, the one who never asks for much. And because this role once ensured safety, it becomes difficult to release. Inside, however, something restless remains. A quiet tension. a longing to be chosen without performing, to be loved without adapting, to exist without managing everyone else's emotions. But this longing is often buried beneath guilt, because prioritizing the self feels like betrayal, because being anything other than accommodating feels wrong. The child who learned to please did so out of intelligence, not weakness. It was a solution, a strategy, a way to survive emotionally complex environments with minimal damage. But survival strategies, when carried too far, become cages. What once protected now restricts. What once kept love close now keeps the self distant. And so the story begins here, with recognition, with the quiet understanding that behind constant kindness, there may be fear. Behind endless empathy, there may be abandonment anxiety. Behind the need to please, there may be a child who learned too early that love must be maintained, carefully, gently, at all costs. From a psychological perspective, the child who learns to please others is not acting from excess kindness alone. The behavior is rooted in attachment, nervous system regulation, and the early formation of self-worth. What appears as agreeableness on the surface often reflects a deeper biological and emotional adaptation. Attachment theory explains that children develop internal working models of relationships based on how caregivers respond to their needs. When care is consistent and emotionally attuned, children learn that needs are safe to express. When care is inconsistent, conditional, or emotionally unavailable, children adapt by minimizing needs and maximizing harmony. Pleasing becomes a way to preserve connection. In these children, the attachment system becomes hypervigilant. The brain learns to associate relational safety with external approval. The amygdala, responsible for threat detection, stays alert for signs of disconnection. A change in tone, a pause in affection, a subtle withdrawal can trigger anxiety. The body responds before the mind can reason. Compliance calms the nervous system. Disagreement activates it. Over time, this pattern shapes emotional regulation. Instead of soothing distress internally, the child learns to regulate through others' moods. If everyone is okay, the child feels okay. If someone is upset, the child feels responsible. This externalized regulation persists into adolescence and adulthood, often without conscious awareness. Neuroscience shows that chronic people-pleasing is linked to heightened stress responses. Cortisol levels rise when boundaries are threatened. The sympathetic nervous system remains engaged, keeping the body prepared for emotional emergencies that may never arrive. Rest feels unsafe. Stillness feels unfamiliar. Hyperattunement replaces presence. Cognitively, these children develop core beliefs that guide perception. Beliefs such as, "My needs cause problems," "Conflict leads to abandonment," "Being liked is more important than being real." These beliefs are not verbal at first. They live in the body, in muscle tension, in shallow breathing, in the instinct to smile during discomfort. As the child matures, these beliefs become internal rules. Do not disappoint. Do not ask for too much. Do not create waves. The inner critic becomes active, monitoring behavior constantly. Mistakes feel catastrophic, not because of the mistake itself, but because of the imagined loss of connection that might follow. This creates an internal conflict that is difficult to articulate. On one side, there is a genuine desire for closeness. On the other, a growing sense of invisibility. The child wants to be loved, but also wants to be known. Yet, being known feels risky, because being known might mean being rejected. Emotionally, anger becomes especially complicated. Anger signals boundaries, but boundaries threaten approval. So anger is often redirected inward. It becomes guilt, shame, self-blame. The child learns to doubt their own reactions, to question whether discomfort is justified. This self-doubt further weakens trust in internal signals. In relationships, this manifests as overfunctioning. The child takes on emotional labor that does not belong to them. They listen more than they speak, give more than they receive, adjust more than they request. Their empathy becomes one-sided, offered freely but rarely returned in equal measure. Paradoxically, this pattern can attract relationships that reinforce it. People who benefit from emotional caretaking often gravitate toward those who provide it effortlessly. The pleasing child becomes indispensable, yet unseen, needed, yet not deeply met. The imbalance feels familiar, almost comforting, because it mirrors early dynamics. Inside, however, tension builds. The nervous system carries unmet needs. The psyche holds unexpressed emotions. Fatigue accumulates. Sometimes it emerges as anxiety, sometimes as depression, sometimes as sudden resentment that feels confusing and shameful. The child wonders why kindness feels so heavy. There is often grief here. Grief for the self that was never allowed full expression. Grief for needs that were silenced before they were fully understood. Grief for the version of love that never arrived without condition. But this grief is rarely acknowledged, because acknowledging it feels like disloyalty to those who were depended upon. The inner conflict intensifies as awareness grows. The child begins to sense the cost of constant accommodation. Yet letting go feels dangerous. If pleasing stops, what remains? If approval fades, will connection survive? The nervous system resists change, clinging to familiar strategies even when they cause pain. Psychologically, this is the tension between safety and authenticity. Pleasing offers safety. Authenticity offers truth. For the child who learned early that truth threatens safety, choosing authenticity feels like stepping into the unknown. The body reacts with fear, even when the mind understands the need for change. This is why people-pleasing cannot be reduced to a personality flaw. It is a learned survival response, encoded through experience, reinforced by biology, and sustained by belief. Understanding this is not about blame. It is about compassion, because beneath the behavior is a child who learned to protect connection in the only way available. And beneath the conflict is a quiet question waiting to be answered. Is it possible to be loved without performing? Is it possible to belong without disappearing? Is it possible to stay connected without abandoning the self? The turning point for the child who always tried to please does not arrive loudly. It does not announce itself with certainty or clarity. It often begins as discomfort, a quiet fatigue, a sense that something feels misaligned even when everything appears fine. The smile still comes easily, the empathy still flows, but beneath it there is a growing awareness that something is missing. This awareness is not intellectual at first, it is somatic. The body begins to protest, exhaustion lingers even after rest, anxiety appears without clear cause. Joy feels muted. The nervous system, long accustomed to vigilance, begins to show the cost of constant adaptation. The strategy that once ensured safety now drains vitality. Psychologically, this moment represents a shift from unconscious survival to conscious noticing. The child, now older, begins to observe the pattern rather than simply live inside it. They notice how quickly they apologize, how often they minimize their needs, how instinctively they take responsibility for others' emotions. This noticing is subtle but profound, because what can be observed can eventually be questioned. The realization often carries grief, not dramatic grief, but a quiet mourning, a recognition of how much of the self was shaped around others, how many preferences were silenced before they could form language, how often being good replaced being real. This grief is not about blaming the past. It is about acknowledging what was lost in the process of staying safe. Healing begins not with change, but with permission. Permission to feel discomfort without immediately fixing it. Permission to notice resentment without judging it. Permission to acknowledge needs without acting on them yet. For a nervous system conditioned to equate needs with danger, even this internal permission is radical. At the psychological level, healing involves developing internal regulation, learning, slowly, that safety does not have to come from external approval, that discomfort does not automatically lead to abandonment, that emotions can be held inside the self without being resolved through others. This is not a cognitive shift alone, it is a bodily one. The nervous system must learn new associations. Boundaries must be experienced as survivable. Silence must be felt without panic. Saying less must not feel like disappearing. Each small moment of authenticity, when it does not lead to rejection, gently rewires expectation. The body learns through repetition that connection can remain even when performance softens. There is resistance here, deep resistance, because the old pattern worked. It kept peace. It preserved relationships. Letting it go can feel like dismantling identity itself. Who is the child without usefulness, without accommodation, without emotional labor? The fear is not just of rejection, but of emptiness. This is where compassion becomes essential. Not self-improvement, not self-criticism, but understanding. The child did not choose this pattern arbitrarily. It was intelligent, adaptive, necessary at the time. Honoring that truth allows the nervous system to relax its grip. Survival strategies release only when they feel appreciated, not attacked. Gradually, a new relationship with the self begins to form, one where internal signals are trusted, where discomfort is seen as information rather than threat, where needs are acknowledged even if they are not immediately met. This does not turn the child into someone cold or detached. Empathy remains, kindness remains, but they are no longer offered at the cost of self-erasure. Psychologically, this integration creates coherence. The self no longer fractures to maintain harmony. Emotions align, the inner critic softens, the body rests more deeply. Relationships shift, sometimes subtly, sometimes significantly. Some connections deepen with authenticity, others fade when pleasing is no longer provided. This can be painful, but it is also clarifying. The child begins to experience a different kind of safety. Not the fragile safety of approval, but the steadier safety of self-connection. Being alone feels less threatening. Silence feels more spacious. Saying no longer feels like abandonment in motion. There is a growing trust that the self can survive emotional tension. This is not a transformation into fearlessness. Fear still arises. Old reflexes still surface under stress. But now there is awareness, choice, the ability to pause between impulse and action. The child no longer disappears automatically. They remain present, even when discomfort appears. In the end, healing is not about becoming less caring. It is about becoming more whole, allowing care to flow in both directions, allowing the self to exist without justification, allowing love to arrive without being managed. The child who once learned to please learns something new, that they do not need to earn belonging, that connection does not require constant vigilance, that being real, even imperfectly, is enough. And perhaps the most important realization settles quietly into the body, that love, when it is real, does not ask for disappearance. It asks for presence. You were never meant to be loved for how well you disappear. If this reflection resonated, allow yourself to sit with it. Awareness is the beginning of gentleness.